The gorilla may be the most iconic animal in the world, yet only 1,063 mountain gorillas are in existence today, and with decreasing numbers. The health and well-being of every individual gorilla are vital to the species' survival. So join us in our interview with Gorilla Doctors. Gorilla Doctors is an organization that has been providing hands-on veterinary care in the wild and fighting for decades towards the survival of gorillas living in the national parks of Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. From Gorilla Doctors, we speak with Amy Bond, who has been passionate about gorillas since she was just 13 years old. She went on to successfully obtain her master's degree in animal behavior from the University of California and is currently the Chief Communications Officer of Gorilla Doctors.
I think that a lot of us can really feel a personal connection to such an iconic animal as a gorilla. And so I'm personally very, very excited to have you here and to learn more about what it is that you all are doing and the progress that you've made and what needs to be done still. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, great. So I'm going to kick off with the first question. So can you tell us about Gorilla Doctors, about the heart and the mission of the organization?
Yeah, you bet. So Gorilla Doctors is a partnership with the nonprofit Mountain Gorilla Veterinary Project that started in 1986 at the request of Diane Fossey, and I can talk more about that, and the Wildlife Health Center at the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. And we work together to bring life-saving veterinary care to wild eastern gorillas, which makes up mountain gorillas and the Grauer's gorillas, or eastern lowland gorillas.
So I think, the gorilla, as Demian kind of pointed to, is very iconic. We kind of think of Tarzan and all these adventurers going into the jungle and coming across a gorilla, or especially, popularized by Jane Goodall, right, in the gorilla work that she's done and things like that, and especially what you guys are doing as well. So tell us a little bit about what brought you into being into this field, especially with gorillas. Not only are these majestic creatures that normally people see in the zoos or on documentaries, but what is so important about the gorilla, not only to you, but perhaps to the world? And please tell us about how you got involved with that.
Sure. So first, really quickly, Jane Goodall, her specialty is chimps.
And you know what? I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah.
So there is a difference. There
is. And, we chimp and gorilla people, like we have our camps, right? So, that was like blasphemous. No, I'm just kidding. Jane's amazing. But the sort of iconic gorilla woman was Diane Fossey.
Thank you for correcting me.
Yeah. And they They kind of came up at the same time. They were both, initially employed by Louis Leakey and didn't have the scientific backgrounds. And, he really believed that women in general were probably better suited to study primates. Who knows if that's true or not. And then he also wanted women who weren't going to be biased originally through a sort of Western education of animal behavior. And so that was sort of how they both got started. And of course, Jane's gone on to just do extraordinary things for the world. And unfortunately, we lost Diane in 1986, actually December 1985. So that was a real loss for the world. But to answer your question, my background is, and you're right about gorillas, right? There's just something quite magical about them. And it makes my job a lot easier, quite frankly, to get people to rally behind our work. For me, it started when I was 12 in the 7th grade. Our science teacher assigned an endangered species report as a project in our class. And she literally kind of passed around this fishbowl with little folded up pieces of paper, and you had to pick one out. And that was the animal you were assigned. And I just happened to pick the mountain gorilla. And I went to the library because that's, it was still books back then. There was no internet. And I opened my first book and I saw a black and white photo of mountain gorillas, and that was it.
There we go. So your journey started really early. So what brought you to be part of Gorilla Doctors? What was that pull to be part of this organization specifically?
Yeah, it's sort of it sounds singular, like that I have been of singular purpose and focus my whole life. My career hasn't necessarily taken that route, but it did for a long time. So in school, I was very focused, and a year after I first sort of became obsessed with gorillas, and I was living in Ohio. I grew up in Ohio. The Columbus Zoo was hosting an international gorilla workshop. And we're bringing in experts from around the world, and they were really looking at how to find that intersection in what researchers in the wild were learning about gorilla behavior and bringing it into a captive environment to create a more naturalistic habitat and behavioral dynamic for gorillas in captivity. I think I was now 13, and I had gotten to know the keepers at the zoo, and they were doing this conference, and they were like, well, you can come, but you can't come alone because you're too young. Your mom has to come. And so my mom made this deal with me. If I raised the money for the fee, she'd come. And the two keynote speakers of the workshop were Drs. Kelly Stewart and Alexander Harcourt, both of whom had done their PhDs with Diane Fossey and then ran the Karasoki Research Center in Rwanda, which is where the research site Diane set up. And I had read the books, all the books that were out there, and Sandy and Kelly were in the books, and their pictures were in the books. And I was just kind of like, oh my God, it's like, for me, it was like a movie star kind of thing. And so they were the keynotes, and I waited in line, and I talked to them, and I had them autograph my book. And then I started writing letters with Kelly, and they were based at UC Davis out in California. So fast forward 10, 11 years, and I ended up out there in grad school with them as my grad school advisors. So then long winding career, all this kind of stuff, had my own business working in East Africa, and started donating a portion of every sale to gorilla doctors. I was introduced to gorilla doctors through Kelly, because Gorilla Doctors is based at UC Davis. So there was this long history and connection. It was kind of like this whole full circle thing, right? And so then Gorilla Doctors invited me to join the board of directors, which I did. So I was on the board for a short time, and then this position opened up, part-time position in communications for the organization. And I went to our executive director, Dr. Kirsten Gilardi, and I said, literally no one on the planet is allowed to have this job but me. What do I have to do? So I had to step off the board and apply for the job. And luckily I got it. And that, that's where we are.
Well, I think with a demand like that, they kind of gotta, right?
Yeah. I didn't really give them much choice, but.
So can you, I'm curious, can you share with us a little bit then about, because you mentioned captivity, and I was thinking, well, you've got a certain number, small number, right, relatively, of gorillas in the wild, and then you've got a certain number in captivity. And I don't really, and I think a lot of our listeners don't, like myself, really understand that bigger picture. And so in terms of, like, I think of captivity as being, well, on one hand, it's people want to go look at gorillas, right? So that's the bad part of it. On the other hand, there might be some opportunities to save gorillas or preserve their lives when they don't have habitat or other reasons. So just to sort of understand the bigger picture about sort of the life overall of the species, can you kind of share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, great question. So there's 4 subspecies of gorilla, all of which are found in Africa, right? Sort of naturally. There's 2 Western subspecies. So on the more west coast of the continent, the Western lowland gorilla, which is what you typically see in zoos, and the Cross River gorilla, which is critically endangered. It's a population of maybe like 300 individuals that was only recently discovered in the last couple of decades as its own separate subspecies. And then there's the 2 eastern subspecies, which is where our work focuses. That's the mountain gorilla and the eastern lowland gorilla, or the Grauer's gorilla. The Grauers are found only in Democratic Republic of Congo. Mountain gorillas are found in Rwanda, Uganda, and DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, in 2 distinct populations. They are, in fact, mountain gorillas are the only great ape in the wild whose numbers are currently increasing. It's a rare sort of conservation success story that has been an international effort with a lot of leadership from the countries where they live and the governments, protecting them, bringing ecotourism to the world to help save the gorillas. As far as captive, again, you mostly find Western lowlands. You're not really seeing any sort of captive efforts as a way to save the species anymore. You definitely have sanctuaries on the continent of Africa where in West Africa, you still have well, actually in East Africa too, there's still quite a bit of wildlife trafficking. Gorillas don't tend to be the target. You get a lot more chimpanzees that you're seeing with wildlife trafficking than gorillas. And in the case of mountain gorillas, they rarely ever survive captivity. There's the Senkwekwe Center at Virunga National Park in Congo that is home to 2 captive mountain gorillas. And they're the only 2 that have ever survived captivity for any long period of time. They had 4, but they're down to 2 now. As far as captivity and the push and pull of that, right? I can speak for myself that seeing a gorilla in a zoo, was at the San Diego Zoo when I was 9, I think was one of the initial sparks before I ever even realized it. And I think that is the power of zoos, is to spark young minds and dreams, for people to grow up and become conservationists. There's power and beauty in that. At the same time, as someone who's trying to preserve gorillas in the wild, it's hard to see animals in captivity, right? That's not where they belong. Right. But the Houston Zoo is one of our biggest supporters and has been, and the work that they've helped us achieve has helped literally critically endangered species recover from a low of 250 individuals left on the planet. Today, we have just over 1,000 mountain gorillas. That's extraordinary, right? Yeah. Not just us. Great. Not just gorilla doctors, right? International effort, but we have a lot. We have the Houston Zoo, as a long time, and the Columbus Zoo as well. Long time loyal supporters in our work.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
And so, you talk about this success story of going from 250 to over 1,000. Tell us a little bit of the ripple effects of, helping these populations grow or prevent from these populations decreasing. And what are the ripple effects we're finding from, recovering these populations?
Great question. So what was I was going to say too, that in 2019, this was another rare conservation win. Mountain gorillas were reclassified from critically endangered to endangered because of this recovery. As far as the ripple effect, boy, that's such a great question, because mountain gorillas in some ways are a unique example because they can benefit from what we call extreme conservation, right? We can provide individual veterinary care to an ill or injured gorilla. Their dynamic, the way that they're sort of isolated in protected national parks, allows for these things, right? We've been able to habituate them to the presence of humans so they don't run away, which allows us to do visual observations of their health, allows us to administer medication via DART if we need to, right? Which is less invasive than anesthetizing them and doing a full hands-on intervention, which we sometimes do. So we can identify them as individuals. So like just how humans have fingerprints, gorillas have nose prints that are unique to each and every gorilla. That's how we identify them, right? So we can do a lot. Yeah. So we can do a lot of really hands-on, extreme, following their behavior over time, following population health trends, following individual health over time, right? We have decades of records. It has allowed for this kind of recovery that doesn't often happen with other species, where in great apes, you're getting, tremendous habitat loss still, right, in forests. All gorillas, at least eastern gorillas, mountain gorillas specifically, live in protected national parks that are effectively surrounded by islands of human population and communities. That allows for daily tracking, right? I mean, the mountain gorillas have park rangers that are with them every single day. There's anti-poaching patrollers who sweep the forest and remove snares. So the ripple effect that there has been also employment, right, for the local communities and the people. The rise of not just this idea of ecotourism, but the combination of wildlife tourism and community development, and that they need to go hand in hand. we're even starting to see that there could be some health consequences of the population rebounding, because the space in which they're in has not grown, but the numbers have, and so we're looking at, we do scientific research as well, not just veterinary care. Are there, potential health consequences for the population becoming more dense than it has been historically?
Thank you. And I just have a quick small question to go off of that, so people can kind of gain a perspective when it comes to audience, myself included. So do you guys have kind of a guesstimate? I'm sure you don't have necessarily records of this, but do you have a guesstimate of what the healthy level of population that these gorillas in, especially the eastern side of Africa, what they were before we had such low numbers, and what caused all these low numbers to become a thing just decades before?
Yeah, so I don't have specifics. Historically, it would have been that, in terms of numbers, I don't have specifics what they were. It's been a very long time since we've seen what their maybe historical geographic distribution would have been from when the forests were still there, right? So when human populations were much lower, much less dense, before a lot of deforestation happened, before the government stepped in and protected what was left, their distributions would have been a lot greater. Now, mountain gorillas specifically probably weren't as distributed, say, as like the eastern lowlands or western lowlands, where you have these massive tracts of forest. Because they're mountain gorillas, they have specific ranges higher up in the mountains, right? So they would have been a bit more limited anyway. But honestly, as far as historical numbers, I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, and I just kind of wanted to highlight that for our audience, is that, there's all these animal conservation efforts out there to try and preserve these numbers, because we don't really have record of what they were before, but we know that this is not a healthy number when you reach like 250, right? And it's such a small area, and it's going, that definitely was not the number prior. So kind of looking at how human development has happened, and especially imperialism and, all these global historical events that have really impacted animals, and that we don't actually really know what the healthy numbers were prior. It's kind of scary. And I just kind of wanted to put that out there to kind of get people to realize that our impacts could be even deeper than we realize, because we don't have historical context. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there, and I'll let Demian ask the next question.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to return for a second to what you were talking about. So it seems that, I'm imagining that sort of ignorance of the depth of the problem, or the fact that, that there weren't going to be gorillas anymore, wasn't something that probably occurred to people back in the times when they were destroying their habitat or directly killing the animals. And then, of course, at some point, somebody realized that they need to step in and do something. And obviously that's happened, and the efforts are, world famous, really. But can you speak to that just a little bit more than and say, so, if we were to look at right now, like what currently are the biggest threats that that gorillas in general are facing, and what is, what needs to be done about it?
Yeah. The biggest threats for the species as a whole is probably, forest loss and habitat and deforestation. In West Africa, the bushmeat trade is quite large. You have wildlife trafficking. Those are sort of some of the big buckets for wildlife in general. With gorillas, and in eastern gorillas, the biggest threats really are disease and trauma. Trauma is injury, snares, things like that. But disease is a major threat. Gorillas, we know, are susceptible to SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID. Knock on wood, to date, we haven't had any gorillas in the wild test positive that we've tested. But they are susceptible. And when the gorillas in the San Diego Zoo first tested positive in January of 2021, it was this sort of, everybody had been white knuckling it. what would happen. And there were people out there saying, oh, COVID could wipe out gorillas and all this kind of stuff. And we were a little bit more conservative in our, sort of predictions, because we didn't, we don't know, right? We don't know how it's going to present and how different it could be from how it was in humans. But when most of the gorillas at the San Diego Zoo recovered without requiring any treatment, that was sort of our first kind of deep breath since the pandemic had started. But they're highly susceptible to Ebola, which is, much higher mortality rate. In fact, we've seen whole sort of mini populations of Western lowland gorillas effectively disappear from an Ebola outbreak. So, and those are the diseases we know about. As we've all learned firsthand, they can emerge from anywhere at any time. And so, we're always very vigilant about that. Trauma from snares, that's actually reduced quite a lot over the last several decades. And again, that's the vigilance of these rangers and these anti-poaching patrollers that go in and sweep the forest for snares. And the other thing is, because they're with them every day, if there's a gorilla caught in a snare, we get a call and rush into the forest that day.
What is, sorry to interrupt, what is the reason for these snares? Just to understand, like, the snares are there to catch other animals or for food, or what are the reasons that those snares are in place?
Yes, great question. Thank you. I feel like I'm rambling a bit. I apologize.
It's okay.
Yeah, so such a great question. The snares are typically set. They are poachers. They are technically entering the forest illegally. To your point, Anastasia, about imperialism and historical context, this is land that they used to be able to hunt freely, right? And they're just trying to feed their families. So they're typically trying to set them for things like small antelope, bush pigs, things that they would be able to then feed their families with and or sell in the local market. And what can happen is gorillas can kind of come along, and the young ones especially, which are curious and playful, and they can get caught, typically around their wrists or their hands or their feet. The way snares work is, as you pull, they get tighter, right? And so it can cut off circulation, it can break the skin and cause a wound. Historically, before there were veterinarians, they could get infected. Infection could lead to illness and death, right? And this was one of the things that Diane, kind of made this cry for in the early 80s, that she knew veterinary care could make a huge impact on the decline. And so she put this call out, and Ruth Kiesling of the Morris Animal Foundation basically answered that call. And the first gorilla doctor arrived in Rwanda in 1986. And that was how we began, as a single American veterinarian. Today, we're an international team, and all of our veterinarians on the ground are from the countries where we work in Rwanda, Uganda, and Congo.
Yeah, that's excellent. I really love the fact that you guys work with the local populations in that, because, we've heard in the past of all these organizations that kind of come in and they do what they want and then they kind of leave. And there's
helicopter conservation.
Yeah. And Damien and I are very diligent in making sure we talk with organizations that don't do that. We want to make sure that we highlight organizations that are working with the local. And I love that, it also helps employ those people, as you mentioned. It really brings up employment and everything. And it also builds up the skills too of that community, so that we can gain more sustainability on the ground, as well as with the help that comes in. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. Just want to give big kudos to you guys and for adopting
Thank you. Capacity building is a really big part of our mission. Houston Zoo, again, has provided funds for many years to help our staff and other people in the country get advanced degrees. When we do internships and, work sort of study programs, it's all, people from those countries. We don't always get it right, because we're kind of actively doing our own analysis of, sort of decolonizing, conservation, and understanding, what the Western perspective brings, value and hindrance, right? And that's part of the reason that local leadership is so important, because no one's going to understand the dynamics better than people who are from the country where we're working, right? So our job in the States is this kind of stuff, right? Like raise awareness, raise funds, make it possible for our teams over there to do what they already know how to do and do best.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, big kudos to that. Hey,
we're trying.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about what's going on with gorilla doctors specifically, and what you guys are currently working on, or that you're really excited about that you're currently working on, or what perhaps may be coming up here soon.
That's a big question. Man, if I was rambling before. Okay. So our mission, first and foremost, is to provide veterinary care when a gorilla is ill or injured, right? And so we do that by regular, monitoring of their health. And we do that visually. We go into the forest. And that's something that's also really important that people sometimes miss about our work is all of our work is done in the forest. That's our hospital. We never remove an animal from the forest to provide treatment. And we always provide treatment surrounded by the gorilla family, right? So very often our vets are, working and the silverbacks are agitated and charging and, while we're trying to provide care. Right. It's kind of extraordinary. I'm biased, but I think it's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it is totally.
So that's our core mission. It always will be. We also do scientific research looking at, different types of impacts of health, population level trends. We look at gastrointestinal parasites. That's something we treat a lot, and presents across the two different populations, the one in Uganda, the Bwindi population, and then the Virunga population, which spans Rwanda, Uganda, and Congo. So we look at long-term trends over that, trying to determine what are the causes. Gorillas are susceptible to human pathogens. We talked about that with COVID. What other types of things might they be getting exposed to? Where's it coming from? Things like that. And then we also, big part of our sort of direction in the future is really starting to look at, not trading off achieving our mission by further contributing to, climate change and, habitat, all the different things that make up the moment we're in, for the challenges that we face. Can we operate as a nonprofit in wildlife conservation and do that with as little sort of environmental impact as possible, right? We fly over there, huge carbon, right? Footprint.
Right.
Do we have to? Do we have to go as often? Not really, right? We've got an amazing team there. We don't need to just pop in every once in a while, and really looking at that and planning out that, that future of what does it mean to be, a nonprofit organization operating today with the challenges we face and stay focused on our mission.
For me, getting in touch with you all and having you on our podcast today is so important because of the fact that the gorilla is such an iconic animal, and obviously with a limited species, saving those animals through veterinary care is essential. And because we can't just expect it for them to sort of manage it all on their own, especially with decreased habitat and no place to go and live and expand their populations really. But the fact that it's an iconic animal, it means that it's an example because, there's plenty of human being examples of people that are amazing people. I mean, it's but the reality is that we need to look towards animals and we need to respect animals and the fact that we're sharing this planet with them, and that it makes me really sad. I remember reading an article years ago in National Geographic. You probably remember there was a murder of a large male gorilla, and it was and I saw this picture of them sort of carrying the body, and it made me really, really sad. And I actually brought tears to my eyes, and I just couldn't understand why don't people care more? And I'll never really understand that, to be honest. But this is really what I wanted to speak about just for a minute here, is just to say that the work that you all are doing is important because it needs to inspire people to respect all the other living creatures that are on this planet, and not just place so much importance always on people. We are important, obviously, because we're people, and we want to live and be happy, just like every other kind of animal out there. But we need to share, we need to be responsible, and we need to help the planet at the same rate that we're hurting it. I mean, what can be more iconic than an animal that is so similar to us, right? And that these are literally representing the entire animal kingdom.
First of all, very well said. What you were speaking to, I think it's such a complex and nuanced moment that we're in. Gorillas are what we call an umbrella species, which is exactly what you were speaking to, right? So protecting gorillas protects the forest that they live in. Forests are great carbon sinks, right, for carbon capture. Protects all the other plants and animals and insects that make up the forest that they live in. So they, saving gorillas, our vets say that when we save gorillas, we save ourselves. And, it's true on so many levels, from the sort of very practical to, in my particular case, I find that almost a spiritual calling, right? And I'm getting a bit philosophical here, but Toni Morrison said that the purpose of freedom is to free others. And I think people who work in conservation, people who are doing like what you're doing, creating a platform for awareness and for voices to be heard and for inspiration to happen. There's a collective movement, right? That's in the right direction. And what we're doing is creating, I think, an opportunity to help free the minds of others who it isn't that they don't care, right? I don't believe that. I choose not to believe that. We don't know what we don't know until we do, right?
Besides the obvious of donating money, which certainly we encourage our listeners to do, what are some one or two ways that our listeners, or that people, anybody that we can make aware of what you all are doing, can support gorilla doctors and the work that you all are doing, and just in general gorillas?
The position we're in is one of extraordinary privilege, right? We have the freedom to think about these things, to take action, to change our own behavior, because we have freedom from poverty, oppression, hunger, right? When you are just trying to feed your family, you don't necessarily have the freedom to choose something else. We do. So it's our responsibility to do whatever we can with wherever we are in our lives in this particular moment to try to make a difference. And that could just be, look, I'm not a huge fan of zoos, but it could be that you take your child to the zoo, right? And introduce them to the animals that we share this planet with. Because as a kid, when we see these things, we also see things anew through the eyes of children. So, one of the things with gorillas that can get tricky for people who are really far away and who may never see them in the wild, and who it's like, well, what can I do, besides donating? Low-hanging fruit, right? But maybe you don't have a lot of disposable income. So maybe it's just, reading some articles. Maybe it's starting to think about your individual carbon footprint, right? Because if each one of us thought about one thing we could do to reduce our carbon footprint, and that could just be, I hate to say recycling, because, the report that came out recently that the US recycled like less than 5% of its plastic, that was depressing. But 5 is better than 0.
Right.
Conservationists are by nature optimists, which you would kind of think the opposite, because we're on the front line seeing everything that's happening. But because we're on the front line seeing everything that's happening, we know about all the people working together to make a difference. And I find that really inspiring.
One thing that we have always found in common with all of our guests, and you just said it, is that conservationists, whether it's with environment or animals, or even those who are more on the humanitarian side, they're all optimists, and they're all on the ground floor. They're all seeing basically daily acts of evil in some ways, or daily pain right? And yet there's this overarching optimism of we can do it, we can make change, we are doing it right now. All it takes is some added support. Just kind of wanted to put that out there, that those who are listening, if you feel compelled by this to help, go to Gorilla Doctors, go to all the social media links that we have wherever you're listening or watching this podcast episode, follow them on social media, do your volunteering through sharing, having conversation, donating $1 or $100 or $1,000 or $1 million, whoever you are out there, and whatever disposable income you can do. All of these facets are needed, and these kind of causes need that army to push that forward. So I wanted to put that out there, that we all are optimistic in how this is moving forward. Even though we have our dark days, we are all optimistic in how we can change things, because we can. And that's kind of the hopeful side of our soul, is saying we can make change. So now let's take action and do it.
Beautifully said. And I think it's very easy to get paralyzed and overwhelmed. And so it's just start wherever you are with whatever you can. And, maybe that's tending a small garden, right? It is no less meaningful than being out in the forest, providing veterinary care. To the gorillas, it all matters. That's a huge part of our approach. We call it One Health, right? The health of one impacts the health of all. We each have our own unique role to play, and every single one is just as meaningful. So wherever you can participate.
Even if it's just the next time your friends offer to buy you one additional drink, say, no thanks, but you know what? I would like that $5 to give to Gorilla Doctors, right? So, really, it's like amazing how it's amazing how many little things there are that can be done if we really start asking ourselves that question.
And Demian, I think you had a really cool fundraising idea right there. That was great.
Seriously, that's why I laugh so hard, because we were doing this campaign called Growing Up Gorilla, and we had kind of done some math and figured out that it costs roughly $5 a day to monitor the health of one infant gorilla. And when we did it last year, we had something like 58 infants that we were currently kind of monitoring the health of across the 3 countries. And so that was the whole thing. It was like $5 will monitor the health of one baby for one day, and so $5 has real impact.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Amy, and with Gorilla Doctors. We really appreciate you being here and really educating not only Demian and I, but our audience on the importance of gorillas, the environment, and really as humanity as total, how this is all really intertwined. And so everyone who's listening, please go to Gorilla Doctors and all the links that we have below, whether you're watching or listening to this, follow them, share, be part of the army to help save these gorillas and support these great causes. So thanks again, Amy, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me and creating this platform for people like me.
Thank you for listening to the GoodViral Podcast and being part of the conversation. If you are inspired by this episode, go to our website at goodviral.org, where you can find resources and listings from the episode to continue good efforts.
Like, comment, and share this episode to any or all of your social media channels. It's really easy to take a small action, and maybe you'll inspire a big result.
When good goes viral, the world gets better.